Hey everybody, this is Julie from My Mundane and Miraculous Life, and today we are going to be discussing some more of your frequently asked sensory questions. And we are specifically going to be talking about what to do when your child is resisting those great sensory activities that you have planned and they're not wanting to do them. Because you know that there are lots of great benefits to these sensory activities, right? It will help your child to be better able to regulate their responses to sensory input. It's going to help them be able to handle the sensory input that they don't want. They'll be able to handle it better if they're getting good sensory input throughout the day via these sensory activities. You can also help children that are seekers, help them to get the input that they're seeking in a positive way instead of maybe a negative way. Say a child is a proprioceptive seeker and they tend to hit other people or bite on their fingernails. If you're giving them the right sensory input throughout the day via sensory activities, they will hopefully not be doing these negative sensory behaviors. But it can be really confusing as to why a lot of kids are resistant to these sensory activities. I know my son is definitely one of these kiddos that he's a seeker in most areas, and he still ends up not wanting to do these sensory activities, which a lot of times doesn't make sense because they're supposed to be seeking these things, right? Why wouldn't they want to do the things that they crave? We're going to talk about that. And also, it can really seem hopeless if your child is struggling with avoiding certain sensory things. You're like, giving them that sensory input that they want to avoid is not going to work, right? So we're going to talk about that. It's obvious why an avoider doesn't want to do certain sensory activities, but why does a seeker avoid sensory activities? So a lot of times the reason is it's a control issue. And so for all sensory kids, their world feels really out of control. When sensory input comes at them, which they can't control, their body reacts in a way that oftentimes they also can't control. So when they do see something they can control, they're going to latch onto that and cling to that. So you're going to find a lot of kids that seem to be really stubborn. It might not actually be their personality. It might be because it feels like their whole world is going back and forth, so they're clinging to something that they can hold on to. There are about 4 or 5 different ways to help make these sensory activities be something that your child actually enjoys, whether they're a seeker who's fighting for control or an avoider who just really dislikes this sensory input that is coming at them. The first thing, and this is why occupational therapy is such a fun thing, is it's supposed to be fun. All right? The point of sensory activities is to make them irresistible, especially for avoiders, okay? So if your child is an avoider in the tactile area, when you present them with something that is a thing that they tend to avoid, you want it to be something that they just can't resist. So a sensory bin is a classic example of this. You put it together, a little bin that has colored rice and little figurines and scoops or whatever, and say your child tends not to enjoy the feeling of rice, or maybe it's a sensory bin with water, or whatever it is, the tactile sensation they don't like. You make it so that they forget about themselves in a way, just making it so fun that they don't even notice that they are branching into sensory activities that they never would have under normal circumstances. You also never ever want to force your child to do a sensory activity. Okay, you're trying to help them overcome that fight or flight reaction that they have when a sensory input is coming at them. And if you force them, I mean, they're going to have that fight or flight reaction before they even come near to experiencing that sense. So yeah, forcing them is going to make the matter so much worse. While you're not supposed to force them, you can be sneaky about it. Okay, and what I mean by this is you don't have to tell your child that the activity that they're doing is a sensory activity or that it's, affecting their vestibular system, right? They don't need to know that. So when you take them to the park and you tell them to climb up the slide, you don't have to tell them that they're getting proprioceptive input, right? Or when you have a pillow fight and, you know, they're getting all that extra proprioceptive input from getting whacked with a pillow, they don't have to know that that counted as the sensory activity for the day. So you can be sneaky about it. Even like when they're having a meltdown, giving them a bear hug, that's proprioception. Or holding them in your lap and rocking, that's vestibular. Or, you know, tactile, you could rub something. Again, if they respond negatively, you need to quit. But you can rub something soothing on their skin for tactile input, things like that. Or the music you have around in your house during the day, if that's soothing. They don't have to know. You can be sneaky about it. Another thing, like I said, for most of the seekers, they tend to really crave control. So when you're doing sensory activities, it's always good to give them choices. You know, instead of saying, hey, we're gonna do this, give them 2 or 3 options, let them choose, or let them choose the order that you do things in. That's okay, you know, and you need to be flexible with that. It's good to have a lot of variety, and you can turn things into games, which of course makes things fun. So one thing I like to do is I use these sensory activities cards that I created. And I just put them on this key ring, and there's a ton to choose from. Now, normally I would not give them this whole thing because, you know, they might pick something that I'm not in the mood to set up. Most of the things you don't have to set up, but, you know. So you give them, you know, a couple things that are okay with where you're at in the day with your family and how much time you have, and give them some options. Or sometimes I'll have the boys play like Old Maid with these cards, you know, so I'll pick out 10 activities that I'm willing to do with them in the next hour, and they'll each have 5 cards, and one of them picks from each other, and whichever card they pick is the activity they need to do. Now that doesn't seem like a lot of choice because it's, you know, random chance, but to them it's fun, and you know, they get all excited about, oh, you had to do such and such or whatever. When you make things into a game and give them choice, you might, you know, have a lot less of a fight when you're trying to do these sensory activities. And it's good to keep things fresh and exciting. A lot of times I find myself even falling into a rut of doing the same sensory activity over and over. And if your child enjoys it, that's great. You know, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But if you notice that you're getting in a rut and your kid starts to, you know, groan every time you bring up the fact that they need to go jump on the trampoline, then maybe do something different. And the last thing I always suggest that parents should do if your child is resisting sensory activities or refusing, straight out refusing to do them, is to model it for them. Okay, so we don't want to be hypocrites. We don't want to stand there with our arms crossed and be like, all right, you gotta do this. We want to be participatory with our kids. And one of the ways this helps is because it's funny, okay? There's a lot of sensory activities that my kids do that are difficult for 33-year-old me to do, like the wheelbarrow, all right? So they'll have me do the wheelbarrow and they'll drop my legs and whatever, and it's funny, or I'll fall off the exercise ball. But that just kind of breaks the tension and makes it not seem like so much of a chore. It's also really good to be modeling sensory activities during a meltdown, especially during a meltdown. I don't know if you've ever had a child in a meltdown where you've told them to breathe a certain way. I don't think it's ever worked that I've told my child to breathe a certain way and then they do it during a meltdown. So what I tend to do is I will start just breathing that way. I'll say, I'm going to do some elephant breaths or whatever, and I'll do the elephant breaths and I'll just do it for like a minute, and all of a sudden I'll hear they're doing it the same way too. Also, you can, you know, if they're in the middle of a meltdown, pick them up in your lap and get on a swing or get in a rocking chair or whatever. And that's, again, kind of sneaky, plus you're modeling sensory behavior and how to calm down. So yeah, if you guys are struggling with getting your kids to get excited about sensory activities, please leave me your questions down below and I'll see if I can help you out. But remember, you want to keep it fun. You can be sneaky about it. Give them choice and control. And model it for your kids, because sensory activities really can be a lot of fun. And the more you do them, the better they're going to be able to react to the sensory input around them. And you're going to get back on an upward cycle instead of that downward spiral.